Assalamu alaikum. Dear students, welcome to Learner Competitive Exams. Today we will discuss Pakistan Affairs, important topic, national interest of Pakistan. Students, इसमें हम नेशनल इंटरेस्ट ऑफ पाकिस्तान के बारे में कंप्लीट लेक्चर समझेंगे, which includes what is national interest, intensity of national interest, key principles of national interest, kinds of national interest, policy and strategy, national interest and foreign policy, Pakistan's key national interest, agencies determining national interest in Pakistan, impediments in achieving national interest, and key to achieving national interest. These are the major focus of our today's lecture. Let's start. First of all, we discuss what is national interest. We are motivated to act by what is best for us. Just like there are things that are best for people's individual lives, there are things that are best for nations. These are called national interest in simple language. National interests are nations' response to emerging geopolitical challenges. They are dynamic, tangible, and attainable targets that can best safeguard the strategic interest of the nation. They could be both internal and external in nature. The external national interests are embedded in the country's foreign policy, whereas the internal national interests are represented through the government's internal administration and governance. According to Hans Margentho, who defined the national interest as the interest of a nation as a whole held to be an independent entity separate from the interest of subordinate areas or groups and also of other nations or supranational groups, any foreign policy which operates under the standard of the national interest. National interests are a nation's perceived needs and aspirations in relation to its international environment. National interest usually combined security and material concern with moral and ethical concern. In international relations, there is no enduring animosity or friendship but the national interest. Next, any issue that has the potential to directly impact the pursuit of national goals can be classified as an area of national interest. It has following major dimensions: national security, geopolitical consideration, economic prosperity, military superiority, socio-cultural preservation, security and safety, territorial integrity. National interest therefore stem from the evolving of national goal in each of these dimensions and is also reflection of the relative national strength with regard to these dimensions. Then intensity of national interest, vital. Vital intensity of national interest assure a state its security, its freedom and independence, protection of its institutions and enshrinement of its values. A nation is willing to expend blood and treasures, in short, to do whatever it takes to defend its vital interests. It fulfilled will have, if unfulfilled, will have immediate consequence for critical national interest. Then important do not affect national survival, but they do affect importantly the national well-being and character of the world in which nation exists. If unfulfilled, will result in damage that will eventually affect critical national interest. However, the use of force is not automatically deemed necessary to protect an important interest. Then, peripheral, if unfulfilled, will result in damage that is unlikely to affect critical national interest, does not really pose a threat to the nation as a whole, although it may affect some private interests. The nation may or may not seek to defend a peripheral interest depending on the relative cost of endeavor and the importance of the interest. So these are the intensity. Now discuss key principles of national interest. A country's national interests change over time. Each country has its own national interest, but all countries have common security, economic, and ideological interests. Citizens can disagree on what are a country's national interests. A country's leaders are ultimately responsible for defining the national interest. A country's national interest determine its foreign policy. Now, first of all, we discuss security interest. Physical survival is the most basic interest of any nation. Security interests involve protection against outside attack, protection against internal disorder. Broad security interests shared by all nations like protect natural borders, maintain relations with allies, ensure safety of citizens from violence and crime. Then economic interest promote the economic welfare of a country's people. Broad economic interest shared by all nations provide citizens with an adequate standard of living, ensure economic development and growth, establish trade relations with other nations. Then, ideological interest. Ideological interests may involve protecting and promoting a nation's beliefs, values, culture, religion, history, and system of government. Then, nationalism and national interest. The relation between nationalism and national interest. Aspects of national interest. People who govern democratic communities and nations make decisions based on what is the best interest of the community or nation. Whether a people's nationalism is based on shared ethnicity and culture or shared beliefs and values. They want certain benefits for themselves and their communities. National security, a multi-dimensional view and response toward protecting national interests against threats, both internal and external. Dynamic and evolving as a derivative of national interest, which in itself is an evolving derivative of national strength, underpins and guarantees the pursuit of national objectives in a competing international arena. Then, policy and strategy, national policy, a broad course of action or statements of guidance and objectives adopted by a government at the national level in pursuit of national interest. Objectives are end states that must be accomplished in order to advance national interest. Then, national security strategy, the art and science of using all the elements of national power during peace and war to secure national interest, sometimes called national strategy or grand strategy. Then, changing views of national interest. Just as people's understanding for nationalism may differ, their opinions on what is the national interest may also differ. National interest is not static or unchanging. Events within a country can change people's opinion about what is in the national interest. For example, what was the national interest for the region hit by tsunami December 26, 2006? Then, differing views of national interest. People often decide what is in the national interest based on the understanding on nation and national identity. For example, many Canadians take pride in Canada's reputation as a nation of peacekeepers. Their course of action may depend on whether or not it promotes peace in the world. Another example is China. The Chinese government believes that a strong military is essential. China's military might is meant to safeguard its own security and stability. It is meant to deter the hostile element of Cold War mentality who attempt to threaten China's national interest with force. These are the differing views of national interest. Now, nationalism and national interest, people choices are often inspired by loyalty. Nationalism and national loyalty can inspire people to pursue the national interest of their country or nation. The Summer Olympics of 2008 in Beijing allowed the Chinese to show the world how proud they were of their nation. This would be their national interest. It also provided an opportunity to some to show their resentment against China over Chinese occupation over Tibet to show their conflicting national interest. Then, national interest and Arctic sovereignty. National interests often involve claiming sovereignty over territory. This is the case in the Arctic, where 5 countries claim sovereignty to Ireland and the seabed. These are Canada, United States, Denmark, Norway, and Russia. In August 2007, Russia claimed part of the 800-kilometer Lomonosovo Ridge, which runs under the Arctic Ocean. The Russian government stated that this ridge is part of the continental shelf that is connected to Russia. Canada disputes this claim. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, countries have sovereignty over 22.2 kilometers of sea beyond their coastal line. Two factors highlight the importance of claiming sovereignty in the Arctic. The ice is melting. This may open up the Northwest Passage, which will make it easier to travel from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Canada lays claim to this passage, but other nations dispute it. There is an abundance of resources in the Arctic, from oil to gold, tin, and diamond. A policy is a plan of action. नेशनल इंटरेस्ट एंड फॉरेन पॉलिसी को डिस्कस करते हैं. A policy is a plan of action that has been deliberately chosen to guide or influence future decisions. A country's government is responsible for developing both domestic policy and foreign policy. Foreign policy decisions may have short-term effects or long-term effects. Some foreign policy decisions made at the end of World War I are still affecting the world today. Many people believe that the turmoil in the Middle Eastern countries related directly to the foreign policy decision of the United States and European countries as they pursued their own national interest. Pakistan's key national interest. Now, what are the agencies determining national interest in Pakistan? First of all, intelligence agencies, which is army, vital interest. For example, nuclearization of Pakistan, joining CETO, CENTO, and war on terror, other geostrategic issues, etc. Political leadership, vital, important, and peripheral interest. For example, nuclear detonation, economic development, poverty alleviation, sectarian harmony, water and food security, educational upliftment, then media and civil society. Peripheral interest, for example, good governance, gender equality, sectarian harmony, rule of law. Then, what are the key national interests of Pakistan? First, self-preservation, primary duty of any government. Second, independence, sovereignty. Then peaceful region coexistence. Then non-alignment, respect for United Nations Charter, bilateralism, support to right of self-determination of Kashmiris, unity of Islamic world, establishment of peace, good relations with neighbors, international and regional cooperation, maintenance of minimum nuclear deterrence, brotherly relation with China and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, peace in Afghanistan. Then move toward impediments in achieving national interest. First of all, corruption, bad governance, myopic political leadership, external pressure, weak economy, political instability, civil military turbulent relations, terrorism and sectarianism, and Indian involvement. Key to achieving national interest: ensure rule of law and accountability, civil military cordial relations, aggressive foreign policy, resolution of Kashmir issue according to UN resolutions, friendly ties with neighboring countries, increased economic activity, democracy in tribal areas, maintenance of minimum nuclear deterrence, improve microeconomic indicators, strengthening LEAs. Larry Speaks once said, "I would judge, not lie in the national interest." क्लास डिस्कशन के लिए क्वेश्चन: विच कंट्रीज would best protect their national interest, military power or economic power? This is the most relevant question. Dear student, ये नेशनल इंटरेस्ट और नेशनल इंटरेस्ट ऑफ पाकिस्तान के बारे में कंप्लीट लेक्चर था. इंशाअल्लाह नेक्स्ट वीडियो में एक नया टॉपिक साथ मिलेंगे। तब तक अपना ख्याल रखिएगा। अल्लाह हाफिज़।